Well, look who's back. To be honest, this isn't a huge surprise. I mean, Fire Emblem is the focus of my channel and I love talking about it. Now, I said at the end of the Fates Marathon that I was going to give Fire Emblem a break and focus on other series instead, which I still plan to do, don't get me wrong. But the idea for this video was just nagging away at me because I really had the urge to make it. So in the end I said, fuck it, back to Fire Emblem for now. Now, I play through each Fire Emblem game multiple times because they're just so much fun, and each time I try to experiment with and use units I didn't use the first time around, or give units I initially didn't like another shot. And while sometimes the situation doesn't change, I'm sorry Meg and Fiona, I played through Radiant Dawn many times, but you have yet to become viable units on each playthrough. Other times some units become much better, and I have a new appreciation for them. This could be for many reasons. They could have performed much better now that I know the best way to play each Fire Emblem game, they got much better growths and stat boosts compared to last time, their supports made me appreciate them more as characters, whatever. The point is, certain units have grown on me over time. But Blazing Knight, I hear you cry. Which 10 units have grown on you the most? Well, that's why we're here today. So join me everyone, as it's time to give the units of Fire Emblem a second chance, as I count down my top 10 Fire Emblem units that have grown on me. Just a few things to clear up before we begin. First off, as always, this is just my opinion, and I'm ranking these units on how much they have grown on me, and I'll be focusing on how they have grown on me, not which characters are the overall best, because some of these units are still pretty bad units statistically speaking, and there are things I still don't like about certain units, so this list is a lot more personal. Secondly, is I'm only looking at playable units, not NPCs, bosses or amiibo characters, and there will be some characters that I've talked about in previous videos being on here, but they're rather limited, I'll tell you that now. And finally, I'm only looking at the units in the Western Fire Emblem games and Fire Emblem Binding Blade. And while yes, I am playing Genealogy of the Holy War, I haven't beaten the game, yet alone played through it multiple times, to include any units on this list. I'll include it in Fire Emblem video soon enough, but currently this game has got me hooked and it's eating up all of my free time. And with all that cleared up, it's time for us to go for a second round, as everyone deserves a second chance and these 10 units gave it their all this time around. And this is my way of saying that I'm sorry I ever doubted them. Tana. Being serious here for a moment, Tana's at the bottom of this list since from the start I already liked Tana. I mean, in my first playthrough I didn't use her, but I still liked her based on what I saw in the cutscenes. After playing through Sacred Stones a second time and using her properly, then I began to see just how awesome Tana could be. And well, let's just say she made my statement about Sacred Stones being the easiest Fire Emblem game all the more concrete. This is why she's only at number 10, because I feel it's less a case of her growing on me, but rather just getting around to using her full time. But nevertheless, she still impressed me with just how awesome she could be. Too bad Ephraim often doesn't notice Tana as much as he should. Tana is the Princess of Frelia and is the younger sister of Innes, and she joins the army in Chapter 9 of either Ephraim or Erika's route. The main reason I didn't use Tana the first time round was because I had Vanessa on my team, and she was more than capable of being an A-grade Pegasus Knight, so I didn't really feel the need to have a second one. With that said, the first thing that stood out to me was her personality, since Tana is a very sweet character who is able to lift others' spirits and befriend them easily. Now that certainly sounds familiar. Along with having some very strong supports, in particular with Cormag, Erika and Ephraim, that show how she wants to stand on her own and be treated like an adult, as well as wishing for the love the two siblings of Rhinus have. It wasn't just her character that impressed me though, since Tana has got to be one of the strongest Pegasus Knights I've used in the Fire Emblem series, and a unit I make sure to have for my team every time I play Sacred Stones because she's just that good. Tana, being a Pegasus Knight, naturally has high levels of speed and luck, but also rather good strength for a Pegasus Knight and decent skill too, along with good HP, though her defense and resistance are pretty low, so she's quite frail. This allowed Tana to be a lot more offensive compared to most Pegasus Knights, as she could outright kill the enemies or at the very least do a significant amount of damage to them, made all the better when she became a Wither Knight, boosting both her attack and defense and giving her the skill Pierce, making Tana literally rip right through the enemies. Though to be fair, if I saw this coming at me, I wouldn't exactly be terrified, more infatuated if anything else. Sometimes in Fire Emblem you don't pay attention to other units because one in particular steals the spotlight. You want a good example of this? Just look at Setsuna and Fates. But it is worth it to try out other units of the same class, and Tana certainly embodies that statement, becoming one of the best units in Sacred Stones and hell one of the best Pegasus Knights in Fire Emblem, and that is no easy feat, so overall, you really impressed me, Tana. Lucius. Hey look, it's everyone's favourite Fire Emblem girly man that's more misleading than both Libra and Forest. Okay, maybe not Forest, I mean that hair is just fabulous, darling. It's not just looks that are misleading though, because Lucius started out as a pain in the ass unit when I first played Blazing Sword. On the second time around, and with a bit more patience and planning, my outlook on Lucius changed completely in regards to combat and his character, as Lucius became one of, if not the best magic uses in Blazing Sword, as well as one of my favourite mages in the Fire Emblem series, which is not an easy feat when you're going up against these guys and gals, and one of the most interesting characters in Blazing Sword. But maybe I'm overselling this guy. Then again, it wouldn't be the first time I oversold a Fire Emblem unit. I mean, personal experience is certainly a factor in my eyes, but the numbers don't lie. Lucius is a member of the Army of Alive and first appears in Chapter 7 of Blazing Sword. The main reason I didn't use Lucius the first time around is because in order to recruit him in Chapter 16, you need to talk to him with Raven, and let's just say getting around to recruiting Raven in my first playthrough wasn't pleasant. So I wasn't in any rush to use this guy. On top of that, light magic isn't very common in Blazing Sword, so I felt better off using other mages that had access to the more plentiful spells. On the second playthrough, things went much smoother and Lucius became a full-fledged member of the team, and straight away I noticed that Lucius was one of the strongest characters in Blazing Sword. Being a monk, Lucius is a very kind and sympathetic person towards others, trying to help them out whenever possible, but also occasionally becoming very stubborn and outspoken, and this is reflected in his supports, as he is able to forgive Renault for the death of his father, and he refuses to leave Raven's side as he feels the need to help Raven with his inner demons and be there for him. In fact, these two are so close that at a glance, you could consider them a husband and wife given the way Lucius looks on the surface, until you realise that Lucius also has a blazing sword. As far as stats go, Lucius does very well in speed, skill, resistance, magic and HP, though he does have poor defense and luck. This pretty much makes Lucius a glass cannon against physical units, since he can most certainly dish out the damage but not take it. Against magical units, however, he becomes a great tank thanks to his high resistance, as well as becoming a strong staff wielder when promoted. So overall, Lucius is very versatile and can work in attack, magical defense and support. It's no surprise that if a unit is a pain in the ass to recruit, you're not going to want to use them. I mean, the shit you go through in order to get Cap in Binding Blade is a story unto itself. But sometimes it can be worth the struggle, and considering his performance in and outside of battle, I feel Lucius was more than worth it at the end of the day. Vake. I mentioned in the past that the reclassing system in Fire Emblem Awakening was about as unbalanced as Mega Rayquaza. Still my favourite legendary though. But I've also said that reclassing can also be a good thing, as it can help certain units to become much more potent and useful. Good examples based on my experience are Cordelia, Donald, and number 8 on this list, the one and only Vake. Now, I was a fan of Vake's character from the get-go, I mean, who wouldn't be? But because I barely used him in battle, which I'll discuss as to why later, I didn't get to see much of him. The second time playing Awakening, and after reclassing Vake, he became one of the strongest units on my team, which really says something, and naturally seeing more of Vake made me legitimately like this guy, just not as much as the fanbase does. Why do I get this strange sense of deja vu? Vake is a member of the Shepherds and first appears in Chapter 2 of Awakening. Vake was a unit I wasn't big on at first and eventually dropped later on because he was underperforming compared to just about every other unit in the game. The second time around, the situation was very much the same. Vake just wasn't that good, but I thought about reclassing him and made him a barbarian, and that's when Vake became awesome. Vake naturally has high levels of strength, speed, skill, defense, decent luck, and a whopping 105% growth rate in HP. Talk about doing the impossible. Making Vake a great physical unit. The only problem being that his resistance is piss poor, and since magic is considerably powerful in Awakening, Vake went down the moment they turned the page. This is the reason Vake suffered a lot during the mid to late game, made worse by the fact that in my opinion, warriors were generally just a lot worse in Awakening. As a barbarian though, while his low resistance didn't change, his best stats were capitalized on and amplified greatly, making him very fast, very powerful, and having a shit ton of HP, making Vake an outright monster. His character was something I liked from the start though, as Vake is downright hilarious and so full of himself that you can't help but love the guy, always proclaiming himself to be the very best and making up whatever excuses he can think of to justify his actions, no matter how stupid they are. This is why I think Vake and Lisa are canon, because there is no way awaying his personality from anyone other than Vake. Vake is also a total bro, as he does his best to inspire others and feel the need to look out for them, and his support shows just how funny and thoughtful Vake can be. At this point in time, it's obvious that reclassing an Awakening is a double-edged sword, having the potential to make units broken, but also allowing units to become much more useful, with Vake falling into the latter. While I don't like Vake as much as most people, in fact I think he borders on being overrated, I still like this guy and I feel he's certainly got a lot of charm to him, as well as being a total bro, and I mean a literal bro, because him being Chrome's stepbrother is pretty much canon in my eyes. Rinka. Something I noticed upon playing through Birthright again is that the majority of her shielding units have low defense and are overall rather frail. I mean, most of them make up for this with having high levels of speed and skill, but it really says something when one of the tankiest units in the game is a goddamn monk. Nevertheless, there was one unit who I wasn't fond of at first, but after giving her another shot, she turned out to be a very bulky and overall much better unit and character than last time, and this someone was none other than Rinka. Then again, with muscles like that, it's no wonder you're such a tank. I feel you and Effie should meet up sometime. You two will probably get along very well. Rinka is a member of the Fire Tribe and is first playable in Chapter 4 of Fate. Just from her appearance, you can guess the type of person Rinka is, as Rinka is a warrior at heart and strives to constantly better herself. As such, Rinka is very disciplined and headstrong, but also very stoic and cold towards others, not wanting to make friends or engage in idle chit-chat. This has often caused Rinka to have a no-nonsense attitude towards others when talking to them and training with them, and this is reflected in her support, as she often doesn't like to just talk to people and lets them know this firsthand, but will gladly spar with them and get to know them better through fighting, often leading her to learn new things and appreciate her opponents, which is something I find endearing about Rinka and makes her a very standout character among the cast of Birthright. Though thinking about that in hindsight, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. As a unit, I didn't care for Rinka at first because she wasn't very strong or very fast, especially in comparison to other characters, but then I learned exactly how Rinka should be used rather than what I wanted to use her for, and hot damn was she good at what she could do. Rinka excels mostly in defense, with her remaining stats like speed, skill, HP and strength being decent, and everything else being rather poor. At first, Rinka may seem underwhelming, but give her a few levels and while she won't be able to double units or one-shot them, she will be able to tank physical units like no one else and will constantly be on the front lines protecting the team. I'll admit she is rather limited at what she can do as her base class, but upon promotion she gains more options for combat, and her personal skill Fiery Blood helps her even more at tanking units, so Rinka is pretty much the best tank you can get in Birthright. Upon reflection, the characters in Birthright tend to be a lot more limited at what they can do on the battlefield, but often what they can do very well, and I feel Rinka does just that, being a great tank for the team as well as a standout and strong character, and I mean really stand out, because I also think she has a very bold and well designed look and aesthetic. Now there's a list that will be interesting to say the least. Maribel. Fire Emblem has taught me that you shouldn't be too quick to judge people by how they appear on the surface, but rather you should get to know people and see who they really are, and nowhere is this more evident than with Maribel.
My gratitude.
Not a problem. As you may have guessed, Maribel was a character I hated at first for many reasons, and if you played through Awakening, you know exactly why, so naturally I didn't bother using her the first time around.
Wretched beast!
See what I mean? But during my second playthrough, I gave her the benefit of the doubt and decided to get to know her better, and I'm very glad I did, because Maribel, you did a complete 180 on me, becoming one of my higher ranking Awakening characters, along with becoming one of my favourite Fire Emblem medics, and even an honourable mention in top 10 underrated Fire Emblem units. Just goes to show how you really shouldn't be too quick to judge people. Maribel is a member of the Shepherds and first appears in Chapter 5 of Awakening. Maribel was someone I purposely avoided at first because based on her initial appearance, I couldn't stand her. She was obnoxious, stuck up, condescending, rude, full of herself and a downright posh snob, so I was very much like, get the fuck out of my team. On the second playthrough, I was curious to see how Maribel fared as a unit being a healer and all, and well that was my first step towards my appreciation for her, since Maribel kicked ass. Being a troubadour, Maribel has high movement along with high levels of HP, luck, and magic, with decent speed, skill and resistance to round her out, though naturally she's very frail and susceptible to beast killer weapons. Thanks to this, Maribel was an excellent medic, being very potent with staffs and being able to reach allies with ease, made even better when promoted, as she could fight on the front lines and deal some serious magical damage. In fact, she turned out to be overall better than Lissa, even though Lissa was already a very good unit, similar to Ellen and Clarine from Binding Blade, and Sarah and Priscilla from Blazing Sword. Also Natasha and Larishel from Sacred Stones. I'm starting to notice a pattern here. Experiencing Maribel's support and seeing more of her character helped a lot in changing my perspective on her too. While she is still primarily stuck up and rather condescending, she has a good heart and seeks to bring both the upper class and common folk together. Not to mention Maribel is one of the characters that develop the most through their support, and she is often cold towards others at first, but gradually warms up to them and tries to help them out in whatever ways possible, as well as becoming an overall more understanding person. Sometimes, try as you might, you just can't help but judge people straight away based on their actions. I mean, we all thought King Garan was a dick from the start, and sadly that didn't change as the game went on. But sometimes you have to take a step back and really get to know people, and Maribel is living proof of that, and she is not only an excellent unit, but also one of the more well-written and well-developed characters in Awakening despite starting off on a very bad foot. In fact, my relationship with Maribel is pretty much the same with Radiant Dawn, starting out very poorly, but getting much better later down the line. Sophia. Oh shit, now I've gone and done it. I mean, it was bad enough that I featured Wendy in my top 10 underrated units video and stated that I legitimately liked her, and still do. But now I'm talking about liking Sophia, arguably a unit who's even worse than Wendy and one of the worst in the series. Man, I am so close to someone just dropping a nuke on my head for having such controversial opinions. Better get into that bunker then. Indeed, coming in at number 5 we have Sophia, a unit that is universally hated and infamous for being one of the worst units in Binding Blade, held the entire series, and to be fair, I felt the same way at first. So what exactly made me change my mind? Well, there are many reasons for this, but it's primarily thanks to my buddy, Paper Mariotti Fan 1, who did a let's play on Binding Blade and showed me just how useful Sophia can be if used correctly, and after trying it out for myself, she actually wasn't too bad. Not great, but still useful all the same. In fact, if there's anything I can take away from this, is that it's given me an idea for when I eventually let's play Binding Blade. Oh boy, that's going to be an interesting let's play. Sophia is a member of Roy's army and is first playable in chapter 14 of Binding Blade. Now the main reasons people hate Sophia is because 1, she appears in chapter 14, which is infamous for being the absolute worst and most frustrating chapter in the game. 2, Sophia starts at level 1 with very poor stats, making Sophia a walking disaster starting out because she can't do shit, and 3, you get Ray earlier on and he's just an overall better choice. However, if you can get past that really big initial hurdle, then Sophia can turn out to be somewhat potent, since her growth rates are actually pretty good, having high levels of HP, magic and resistance, along with decent skill, though the rest of her stats are pretty poor. As such, Sophia is a bit of a glass cannon from my experience, as against physical units she could dish out a lot of damage but not take it, but she can also be quite the magical tank as well, and though in her base class she can't do much, once promoted she will begin to perform significantly better. Sophia's character is what I feel to be the strongest aspect about her though. Being a half dragon and half human, Sophia has spent most of her time in Arcadia, and thus she is rather shy and quiet around others. However, she does play a rather big role in the story and is responsible for making Roy aware of the situation with the dragons. Her supports reflect this as she is often very shy around others, but tries her best to engage with them and help them out whenever she can. Not to mention she has a very curious nature and is eager to learn about the human world, making her one of the more interesting Binding Blade characters in my opinion. At this point in time, the damage has been done with Sophia, and while she's still one of the worst units in the game, I feel Sophia can be useful if you're willing to put the time in, and I think she's a strong character as well, but if you want to make the best use out of your units and make every turn count, then Sophia's not worth it. Either way, you're the one playing the game, so you play however you want to play, and if you want to use Sophia, go right ahead. Honoka. Poor Honoka. You've got to be one of the most criminally underused characters in Fire Emblem. That's not to say people don't like you, I mean you most certainly have a following and I myself liked you to begin with, but after playing through each pathway of Fates multiple times, it saddens me just to see how little you do in the grand scheme of Fate's narrative. Then again, that narrative has some major issues despite from my perspective not being as bad as people make it out to be, and I myself have some ideas of how to improve it. Don't worry people, that video is still gonna happen. Even if you don't do much in the story, you still deliver on the battlefield and in support conversations, because you have certainly risen up in the ranks of my favourite Pegasus Knights and Birthright characters. In fact, you probably make the top 5 for both categories. Okay, maybe not Pegasus Knights, because you've got some serious competition there. Honoka is the eldest princess of Ashido and is first playable in chapter 4 of Fates. Now I've already expressed my reasons for liking Honoka, but generally I felt she didn't stand out too much and was rather underwhelming, and this is mainly due to the fact that she does very little in all 3 stories. With that said, I feel Honoka's character is one of the strongest in Birthright, since her supports dive into her backstory of how after Corrin's capture, she trained endlessly to become stronger so that something like that would never happen again. This moulded her into being very different from a typical princess, as Honoka is headstrong, stern, unsophisticated, and has an overall very tomboy-like appearance and demeanour, but is also very protective of others and cares very deeply for her family, as well as having a very soft side to her and valuing everyone's life above her own. I felt Honoka had the potential to play a much bigger role in the game's narrative, as there's a surprising amount of depth to her character, and I feel she could have acted as a voice of reason between the two nations, but for what we got, I think Honoka's great. When it came to using Honoka again, I'm convinced that I got RNG screwed on my first playthrough, because Honoka's performance otherwise tripled compared to last time, and she pretty much became one of the front runners for my team alongside Ryoma and Oboro. Honoka is one of the most well-rounded Pegasus Knights in the Fire Emblem series, with all her stats, aside from magic and defense, having a minimum of 45% growth rates, making Honoka a very balanced unit, and a rather versatile unit at that. It made even more apparent with the weapons she can use like the Guard, Bolt, and Dual Naginata, allowing Honoka to work in attack, defense and support, and being a unit who never once left my team and always led the charge into battle, which is actually really fitting of a character in retrospect. Love them or hate them, the Royals and Fates played a big part in the game's story and were arguably the most in-depth characters in the game, though I feel Honoka got the short end of the stick due to how little she does. Nevertheless, playing through Fates multiple times made me appreciate her much more and see just how great she really is. Micaiah. My Micaiah. You and I certainly have an interesting relationship. I've dropped plenty of hints and brief statements expressing my opinions towards her in other videos, and well, let's just say they weren't exactly positive. However, after understanding how to make the best use out of her, seeing more of her character, and being introduced to other Fire Emblem lores that aren't exactly stellar, I can safely say at this point, I like Micaiah, and she's certainly grown on me a lot. However, there are still things I don't like about Micaiah, and they have even become worse over time, so she isn't completely off the hook. But she's overall done more good than bad, and my helmet goes off to you, Micaiah. Or it would, but I'm not exactly ready to take that step right now. Micaiah is the leader of the Dawn Brigade and appears in the beginning of Radiant Dawn. Now the main reason I didn't like Micaiah at first was the fact that as a unit she can be downright frustrating to use most of the time, and the way she acts in part 3 of the game is certainly hair-pulling, but I'll talk about that later. After understanding how to best get through Radiant Dawn, and by that I mean not die every turn, Micaiah can actually be a really useful unit, but also a very risky one. This is because Micaiah stat-wise has amazing growth rates in magic, resistance and luck, allowing her to deal a fuck ton of damage and be an awesome magical tank, as well as activating her skills very often. However, the rest of her stats suck in comparison, and she goes down to just about any physical unit, and she also tends to get doubled a lot because of her low speed. I mean, it was so bad that at one time at level 20, she only had 10 speed. Because of this, Micaiah is a very risky unit to use and must be kept safe at all times, but for what she can do very well, so be sure to plan thoroughly ahead when using her. In regards to her character, Micaiah is certainly one of the more in-depth characters due to her position as a Fire Emblem Lord, since there is a lot of mystery to her backstory and her relationship with Soph is very strong. Micaiah herself is a very caring and strong individual who fights for the one she loves no matter how hopeless it seems. During part 1 of Radiant Dawn, I love Micaiah because she has a strong arc and a real sense of personality, showing both her kindness and bit of resentment towards Ike. Not to mention she has some really funny moments. However, part 3 is where I just facepalm every time she opens her mouth, since she makes so many dumb decisions that even Soph calls her out for being a moron, and as things get worse she doesn't get the hint until it's too late, though that could be more to do with the horribly contrived plot device rather than Micaiah herself. Regardless of this, Micaiah has certainly grown on me, and I do appreciate her as a character and a unit. While not perfect and still very flawed in some areas, she still has enough good going for her to outweigh the bad. It just sucks that she was crammed into an already mammoth-sized game. Man, the Dawn Brigade deserve much better. Maruka. I'm not gonna lie, I feel like a complete idiot for not using Maruka the first time through Conquest. Now to be fair, Conquest is designed in a way where you find a select number of units and simply level the fuck out of them due to the lack of grinding and very limited experience, so I focus on training a more varied team rather than having units of the same class for the most part. Nevertheless, during my second playthrough of Conquest, I decided to main Maruka, and hot damn was that one of the best decisions I made, because Maruka turned out to be a really great unit and an overall strong Wyvern Lord. Not to mention she also had some rather strong supports, and all in all, Maruka is a character that nowadays I could easily see making into my top 10 Nord characters list, right in between Perry and Charlotte, so sorry Nyx, but you've got to sit this one out, but if it helps, I still think you're one of the most underrated Fire Emblem units. Maruka is a member of the Nohrian army, Camilla's retainer, and first appears in chapter 10 of Conquest. Due to Camilla appearing in the same chapter and being infinitely more useful, I didn't feel the need to stick with Maruka and thus benched her after chapter 12. With that said, I did experience some of her supports, and was overall rather intrigued by her character, since Maruka is very much the silent assassin with no emotion who's been through hell much like Jafar. Naturally, she's very cold and sharp towards others, even those closest to her, and has a hard time understanding people. Through her supports, we get to see more of her backstory and why she is the way she is, as well as how she is envious of those who are filled with emotion as she is unable to feel such things, making Maruka one of the more sympathetic and interesting characters. Not to mention, she also has some rather funny supports where she takes things way too literally. If that's the case, a support between both her and Sane would be something to behold, because that would be some S-grade shit right there. As a unit, Maruka may be outdone by Camilla because, let's face it, Camilla is one of the best units in Fates, but she can still hold her own and be one of the stronger Nohrian units. Maruka's stats and growth rates excel mostly in defense, skill, HP and luck, along with having fairly decent strength and speed. Naturally, as a Wyvern rider, she has low resistance and suffers against magical units, so she's a lot less well-rounded and versatile than Camilla. But she does much better as a tank and is one of the bulkiest Nohrian units, often being able to move easily to and hold down choke points to take on a large group of enemies, with her high skill allowing her to often hit her target and either cripple them or outright kill them. Maruka is yet another case of being overshadowed by an overall superior unit and shafted as a result. If it makes you feel better, Maruka, these people have been through the same thing. But as they say, if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. And well, trying Maruka again certainly made all the difference, as she is now a must for my conquest scene and an overall strong weapon rider. I think the term mission accomplished is most fitting of this situation. Before we get to number 1, I'd just like to do a few honourable mentions. First up is Reese. Reese is a unit I liked the first time playing through the Tellius series, and I liked him even more playing through it a second time, but not to the extent of the other characters on this list. Second is Brady. Brady was a unit I didn't care for much to begin with because of how weak he was, but after giving him another shot, while not a great unit, he still had his moments, but I feel his character and supports is where he excelled the most. Third is Kellum. Kellum being underappreciated is the entire point of his existence, but after using him more, I've started to like Kellum more and think he's a solid unit and character, but not anything special. Fourth is Lowen. Lowen is probably the most unassuming Fire Emblem character ever, but give this guy a chance and he can actually be pretty potent cavalier, all things considered. And finally, there's Pelus. Pelus is a character I only saw one side of the first time playing through Radiant Dawn, and thus he didn't leave much of an impression on me. However, the second time around, seeing his character change and being able to actually use him certainly made me appreciate him much more. And with that out of the way, on to the number 1 entry. Astrid. Astrid, I am so sorry for putting you in top 10 worst Fire Emblem units. Not only because that video is awful and stands as the worst video I've ever made, but also because, like a moron, I only focus on how you were in Radiant Dawn rather than looking at you from the perspective of both games. Well, Astrid, after going back through the Tellius series, I can safely say that you are the Fire Emblem character that has grown on me the most, as in Path of Radiance you are one of the best units on my team and my go-to archer, not to mention being an interesting character with some really great support. And in Radiant Dawn, though training you was a bit of a hassle, you could still hold your own and become a rather solid unit. Though sadly your character actually got worse in Radiant Dawn, but the point still stands. Astrid, you have turned out to be a really great unit, and this is my way of saying I'm sorry, both to you and the people who actually watched top 10 worst Fire Emblem units. All 99,000 of you. Astrid is a member of the Crimea Royal Knights and first appears in Chapter 13 of Path of Radiance and Chapter 3 of Radiant Dawn Part 2. My main reason for disliking Astrid was the fact that I didn't like using her as Rolf was already doing fine and I knew I was going to get shit on later on in Path of Radiance. And in Radiant Dawn, Astrid paled in comparison to both units and had much less screen time, so to me she was absolutely worthless. However, many people pointed out just how great Astrid could be, and trying her out for a second time assured me that they were right. Much like Sophia, Astrid appears around the mid-game at level 1 and is rather difficult to train. However, unlike Sophia, Astrid has a much easier time leveling up thanks to her skill Paragon and the fact that Chapter 13 of Path of Radiance isn't utter bullshit. As a unit, Astrid is very balanced, having well-rounded stats and growth rates in all areas, though doing the best in both speed and skill. Thanks to her starting at level 1, Astrid has plenty of time to gain a significant amount of levels and become very potent, made better by her high movement and gaining an additional weapon when promoted, making Astrid one of the best units on my team and in my opinion, the best archer in Path of Radiance. In Radiant Dawn, she once again starts as level 1 with the skill Paragon and her growth rate is overall better, this time around with high levels of both luck and resistance. But because of her low usage in the overall stronger enemies, it can take a long time for her to become useful, something you really don't have in Radiant Dawn, and both Rolf and especially Shinon are overall better choices, but if you're willing to stick with her, Astrid can still be good, just not great. In terms of her character, in Path of Radiance I really liked Astrid, since by nature she's very timid, shy and rather naive, often believing what others tell her and being quick to forgive and forget. However, she wishes to be her own person and forge her own path in life due to her backstory, showing that she has a strong resolve and will. Her supports reflect this as she is eager to learn about fighting from Gatry despite not getting the hint that he's hitting on her, and her support with Soph goes into her backstory and how her life as a noble wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, as well as both of them getting a better understanding of how hard life can be on either side of the spectrum. Radiant Dawn, however, is where all respect for Astrid goes right out the window, since every time she's on screen she's blindly defending Makulov despite him being a drunken buffoon, and every character calls her out on being too weak and feeble, yet Astrid stubbornly ignores them and continues to be Makulov's unintentional slave. Despite this, I still think her portrayal in Path of Radiance makes up for this on the whole. And there you have it, Astrid is a Fire Emblem character who has grown on me the most. While there are still aspects of her character that don't sit well with me, the good more than outweighs the bad, and Astrid has risen through the ranks like no other Fire Emblem unit, going from one of the worst to still rather low in Radiant Dawn, but but easily one of the best in Path of Radiance, and considering the competition, that's an impressive feat to say the least, which is why Astrid takes the #1 spot as the Fire Emblem unit who has grown on me the most. This has been Blazing Knight. I wish you all a great night, take care, and even though there are always going to be Fire Emblem units that don't sit well with people, try to give them a second chance and see how they fare a second time around. You might be pleasantly surprised. Or not, I mean to this day there are still some Fire Emblem units that are just as bad as before, and some have gotten worse the more I use them. But that's enough about Fire Emblem for now, as it's time to look to other franchises again, and I don't know about you, but I'm in the mood for an adventure! Hey there everyone, thank you for watching today's video. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and want to subscribe to my channel in order to keep up to date when the new videos are coming out. For alternate video recommendations, I first point you to my last video, Top 10 Legendary Pokemon, where I count down my top 10 Pokemon with legendary status. Next up, I point you to Top 10 Underrated Fire Emblem Units, where I look at my 10 Fire Emblem units I find to be the most underrated, and for something completely different, why not check out Free For All Episode 1, where I pit the 3 DS Castlevania games against each other in order to see which is the best. Hopefully one of those videos will be to your liking. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I want to say congratulations to Grant, Kimmy Robin, Siles11, Timid Angel, Ravage Rapide, Conman, Feralin Ape 329, and Zane E. Bender. Though none of you were exactly right in predicting the topic of this video, well done for getting close to the mark. Help yourself to a cookie, you deserve it. And be sure to check out my buddy Defog Yap on Amino. He does some fantastic support conversations that are very well written and really worth checking out. Anyway, that's it from me, I'll see you all next time.